Day 271 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another super quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And I'll have a quick look at the Russian military losses. So in the last 24-hour reporting period, there's been 390 Russian military personnel losses there, currently sitting on 84,600, and a few extra bits and pieces of hardware losses for the Russian side. So 5 armored combat vehicles, 6 tanks, and 2 artillery. Now we'll jump back to the map. Starting outside of Ukraine again, in Moscow again, where there's yet another suspicious fire that's broken out near the Russian Red Square. So reportedly another warehouse is burning. And if it's like any of the other burning warehouses in Russia over the past few weeks and months, then it's probably a military hardware manufacturer warehouse as well. Then we'll move over, so interestingly, to the Belarusian border here with Ukraine, where Belarus accused Ukraine of provocatively making some military actions near their shared border. The Belarusian border guard said a Ukrainian serviceman, quote, illegally crossed the border, took photos and videos of the area, and also searched for or installed something in the snow. Now, I've seen the video, I've just got a still for this one, but they're not installing anything in the snow. But I'm also actually scratching my head here, because I'm just surprised that Belarus would call that provocative, because Belarus is the one allowing Russia's military to set up shop in its country. It supplies weapons to Russia, including about 100 tanks so far, and allows Russia to fire munitions from its own border. So who's the provocative or the provocateur here? Not to mention the fact that this border and train line location looks like it's in Ukraine anyway. And if it was Belarusian territory, then where is the country's border house? But it just looks like, once again, Belarus is looking to be setting up some type of narrative about Ukrainian aggression here, and wants to have a bit of a muscle flex as well. Oh, Uncle Luca, your country doesn't even like you. You won't be in power for that much longer. Don't you worry. Then we'll move across right into Ukraine, and we'll start out in the northern Donbass region, where there has been some map updates and some push forwards by the Ukrainian forces. Now, it sort of has gone back and forward. So just say this is what it looked like yesterday in the more northern region up here. Then we push forward and we can see a massive jump. Then it was updated a little bit to that very northern region there. So basically a big push and maybe a small pullback or a clarification of the line. But either way, a win's a win. Then we'll move down a bit. So a bit of ongoing fighting in the Bilarivka region there. So both sides are exchanging artillery shells. And then let's see in Bakhmut, where the fighting is still fierce in this region. However, due to the poorer weather conditions at the moment, it's been reported that the Russian forces are staging fewer attacks on the Ukrainian front lines within the last day. But it's also said that the Russian forces right here are taking some devastating losses still on this front line. So Russia is in a bit of a tough position right now because they're at odds with their own military objectives. So Russia needs to continue to fill the gaps in their front lines constantly with newer conscripts all the time there. But at the same time, they also need to take a winter break to train those very same conscripts to have some sort of utility out of those soldiers on the front line instead. Also on that note, it's been widely reported now that Russia is looking to have a winter truce or a ceasefire via the negotiating table so that they can train up their troops a bit better, followed by breaking that ceasefire on the 3rd week of February 2023. Okay, so that's quite a specific date. I've just said there, I know. But if we go back in time, you'll see Russia invaded Crimea on February 20th, 2014. Then they invaded Ukraine on February 24th, just earlier this year, 2022, just as the winter seasonality was starting to leave the country, making it a bit easier or much easier for a military offensive campaign. So it might still seem like a peace negotiation, or at least a ceasefire, is a great idea from a Ukrainian and international perspective right now. But Russia already has a history of breaking ceasefire agreements twice in the last 5 years in Ukraine. They were called the Minsk 1 and 2 deals. So a negotiation or even a relationship with Russia cannot successfully be based just on trust at this current juncture. Then we'll move down a little bit on the map, and a train tanker in the occupied Donetsk region was hit. In particular, it was in the Makivka region, so right over here. And then Pavlivka in the south, the other front line, not looking too crash hot for the Russian forces at the moment, as the Ukrainian army have full artillery fire control over the entries and the exits and pretty much everywhere around the settlement. Oh, but also in this region, a whole cache of scarce Soviet 122mm munitions was abandoned and left for the Ukrainian army in the south. Now, these munitions are used on the Soviet weapons systems that Ukraine employs, such as the D-30 howitzer and the 2S1 SPG. So Ukraine loves it when they get extra caches of these. Then we'll move across, and there was some reports of explosions reported just outside of occupied Melitopol, so in the settlement of Vesela. Now, it's always a bit harder to get instant access to photos from within occupied regions of things that have occurred, but given that the railway tracks run right through this town, as indicated by the white lines, it's likely to be a strike on the Russian logistics infrastructure there. In fact, let's see, I don't do this often in these videos, but let's go across to the HIMARS, for instance, and click on the settlement. And a HIMARS could be technically reach this settlement from anywhere in this circle. So it's actually crossing just the top of Kherson, the Zaporizhia Oblast, of course, and also the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So it could be anywhere in the southern or northern sections, depending on how you look at it, in either of those oblasts there. So, in other words, well within the range of a HIMARS strike. So, not surprising, really. And yeah, that's that. Then also, a Russian media outlet itself posted some recent photos of a Russian SPG. So that's the big tank-like machine in the background, and a logistics truck alongside it, which usually is designed to help supply the SPG and infantry. It might have some diesel fuel stored along with it too. But it looks like the wheeled vehicle is having a bit of a rough go of things in the mud at this time of year. Now, Russia learned about this issue at the start of the war this year, sort of unexpectedly, oddly enough. So they theoretically should be prepared now that they're seeing this Razbutitsa type of wet and muddy terrain that they have to deal with again, second time in this war now. Then we'll move across to the recently liberated, the north bank of the Kherson Oblast, where daily life in the newly liberated region is starting to come back to some sense of normalcy. And also, Ukrainians are still taking down the numerous Russian propaganda on the billboards in the area and all around. So maybe if the Russian forces instead focused their time, energy, and resources into building better offensive strategies in the region, instead of plastering posters all around the 1,200 square meters of recently liberated, 1,200 square miles of recently liberated land, maybe they could have fared a bit better and not lost all of that blue ground recently. But I'm being a bit facetious, or I'm mostly just kidding on that last remark, because sometimes I just like to fire up the comment trolls. That's all. Also, in the spirit of returning back to a bit of normalcy here, so the liberated Kherson markets are all stocked up again, so that's great to see. And just before the recent liberation, the actual grocery shelves were all but empty, with skyrocketing inflation due to basic goods demand that was completely outstripping supply. And I've got to say, pictures like these always remind me of when Boris Yeltsin, a then Soviet Union politician, visited the USA in 1989 when he made an unscheduled trip to a local grocery store in Texas and couldn't believe all of the abundance and variety in the shops. And this very photo right here is said to be quite historically iconic. Some people even like to single out this exact moment or event as the final nail in the coffin for the fall of the Soviet Empire, because they argue that on Yeltsin's prompt return to the Soviet motherland, he told his political comrades that if regular Soviet citizens, who would often wait in line for hours for most goods, ever saw the variety and availability, etc., like in this grocery store, then there would be a quote, revolution overnight. Then, not too long after that, the Soviet Union collapsed, and then he became president of Russia until 1999, when Uncle Putin consolidated enough power and took over the reins as president, and has, give or take, been Russian president ever since. President for life. Then taking a quick look at some of the Russian captured hardware in the region. So some more Russian vintage was found abandoned in the region. This is another 1960s Soviet era T-62 tank with no shortage of no shortage of Z Army symbols all over the thing. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So Poland announces the acceptance from the German defense minister, so Christine Lambrecht, of a German proposal to deploy more Patriot missile batteries on its soil. Now, the Patriot missile batteries are something that Russia has never been quite fond of. They don't want these systems cozying up to near their borders. And Poland already has 2 of these that were placed in the west of the country, so further away from Russia. But back in 2010, Poland actually placed one of them, from memory, in the central Poland, so closer to the Russian side. But due to Russian objections, Poland had to push them all the way back to the east part of the country instead. But now, due to the missile incident a few days ago on the Polish border to Ukraine, Poland and NATO, and I guess NATO really, I'll say, are using this incident as a really good reason to push this type of system all the way up to the Russian side of the Polish borders. So this is yet another example of Russia's attempt to hold NATO at bay, but is actually backfiring on them instead. Then in some other news, the Ukraine Prime Minister said that Ukraine imports 8,500 generators per day. It's also been noted that taxes, customs, duties, and other VAT charges have also been removed to ensure cheaper, steady flow of these items into the country. So that's really good to see at a time, of course, where Russia is targeting Ukraine's civilian power infrastructure almost every day. But also, some countries are donating some of these 8,500 as well that they receive on average per day. But civilians are also buying anything they can. They're buying any stock they can from the shops or ordering them in from neighboring European countries too. But maybe at the end of this war, the cost will be bared by Putin himself on a very large Putin tab. And in some more news, I quite like this one. So France has sent 2 of their Crowtail air defense systems and 2 M270 Mars systems to Ukraine. So a couple of additional offensive and a couple of additional defensive capabilities or additions to the Ukrainian army. So that is just the perfect mix right there. So that's pretty much it for today, guys. Just making it a bit quicker. I'm cutting out some bits at the end. Usually I do a bit of a funny, lighter side of news, all those sorts of things. Start of the week's always busy for me there. But let me know if you enjoyed the format. Obviously, I'm speaking quite fast today to squeeze in as much as I can in a hopefully shorter, more limited amount of time. Let me know if you hate it. But I appreciate all your support. Thanks for all the comments and the likes and subscriptions, and I do hope to see all of you guys there on the next one. Cheers.